Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Milana and I read books and I enjoy them. I also want to introduce films into my content as well, but this video will solely be focused on my 2025 reading goals. I read a variety of different books. I read classics, I read literary fiction. Those are the two main genres. I also love to read essays, books on social theory, philosophy. Am down to read from a plethora of different genres that I don't normally read in. So, for example, fantasy is something I would love to get into more. I read Dune a couple years ago. I also sometimes read romance. I love Emily Henry. That's like the only romance author I've really been able to stomach. I've tried to read some other romance authors, but she just does it the best. It just feels like I'm in a rom-com, so there's that as well. But most of the books on this list that I'm reading from this year are classics, nonfiction essays, and literary fictions. So for 2025, I wanted to switch from doing a numbered reading goal, which I did in previous years. So this year, my goal is to read books that intimidate me and books that are 5-star anticipated reads. I find if I have really high expectations for a book, I will put it off for years, and I hate that for myself, so I want to change that this year. I also so happen to have 30 books in this list, so the number goal technically is 30, but I'm sure I'll read more, and I will read outside of this list too, because I've collected books since I've made this list, and I know some of those I really, really want to read. For example, I started collecting the NYRB books, and I'm very excited to read those. But anyway, besides this, I just really wanted to challenge myself to broaden my perspectives and expand as a reader in general. I love to continue to educate myself on many different perspectives and experiences that people go through in the world, and that's one of my very favorite parts of reading, so that was really in the back of my mind when I was choosing these books. I also would like to start dissecting books from some of my favorite authors more, and just really get into learning more about the craft of writing and the different approaches these authors take. I read a lot of books last year that had formatting and writing that really, really fascinated me, and I read those things into account that I really enjoyed into my own writing for the future. One of my goals outside of reading this year was to write as often as possible this year, just so I can really dive into the stories that I want to tell with my own work. So you could say there's a lot of thinking that went into selecting the list of books. I have them all scattered on my bed. There are so many of them. That's why my bookshelves are half empty, because I just pulled them all out for you. I think only a couple of them are on my e-reader, but everything else is physical, which is great because I have accumulated so many physical books over the past few years that just need to be read. I might even free up this shelf here and put my TBR here just solely on the shelf, so then I can visualize those books that I'm trying to tackle this year. I think I like that idea. But anyway, let's get started on this list. I've got my list right in front of me of all the books, and I'm gonna quickly go through all of them. All right. For starters, I have been dying to read a Clarice Lispector book for years now. There's quite a few people that have raved about her work on YouTube, on TikTok, and Near to the Wild Heart was the one that really stood out to me as one I wanted to start with. I also love these editions. There's 4 of them, and when you put them together, you have a face there. Anyway, if you're curious about Clarice Lispector, I would highly recommend Emily's videos on here. I'll put her right on the screen here. She has a guide on where to start with Clarice Lispector's books, and she also has a tier ranking video of all of her books. She's a huge Clarice fan, and she's a great guide into her books for sure. So I'm very, very excited to get into this. I know her books are on the shorter side, and what had drawn me specifically to her work was everyone sharing the same review of it, where she's been able to accomplish so much in such a short amount of pages, which I always find very impressive in books when they're short and so impactful and say so much. One of the authors that really stood out to me last year was Claire Keegan, and because of how short and impactful her books were. So after I read Claire Keegan, I was like, absolutely need to get into Clarice and more short books with beautiful, stunning, masterful writing. Next we have Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I've wanted to read this forever, and Jane Austen in general for a very long time. I have quite a few of her books and still have not picked them up. I don't really know why. I do also really love the Pride and Prejudice films, and so I think this would be a fun one to read and then watch the movie renditions afterwards. It was the 2005 version that I watched as a kid, and I loved it. So I think this is a great start for me for Jane Austen. And then maybe I'll move on to some other ones. I have a feeling I'm really, really going to enjoy Emma by Jane Austen. And I also own that one too. So who knows, this might spiral me into a Jane Austen era. But I think I plan on reading this one for the summer. Then we've got Notes from Underground by Dostoevsky. As you can see, had started this last year and ended up just adding it to the pile of books that I started and never finished, which was very rough. There was more than 10 books in that pile, and I was really enjoying it. It was very dark and gloomy and just has one of the most iconic starts to a book ever. Quote, "I'm a sick man, I'm a wicked man, an unattractive man, I think my liver hurts. However, I don't know a fig about my sickness, and I am not sure what it is that hurts me." Love that start to this book. And I've been wanting to get into more Russian classics this year, so that's a big priority of mine. And there's more Russian classics you'll see on the list, but I think this is where I'm going to start off because I had already started it, and also because it's a shorter read and less daunting than some of the other ones on the list. Then we have The Bridge on the Drina by Ivo Andrić, and this I really, really, really want to get to because I have never read a book from my area of the world, from where I'm born in. I would love to get into more books from the ex-Yugoslavian area of the world. And so Ivo Andrić, I feel like, was only a natural choice because it's one of the most well-known books from that area of the world. Won the Nobel Prize for Literature back in a long time ago. So it's quite a old book. Let's see. 1977 is old. Oh, 1945 was when it was originally published in Belgrade. But I'm really, really excited to get to this. This is historical fiction, I believe, and this bridge ties into communities that are impacted in that area throughout history. I know there's mention of the Ottoman Empire as well, and it spans through the novel, so I'm really curious to learn about the historical references in this novel as well. I also have some of his books in Serbian, but I'm too scared to read them in Serbian. I think it would take me forever, so I do have this English copy as well that I will get to. But yeah, that's why this is on this list. Then we have Angela Davis's Woman, Race, Class, and I love a good social and race theory book. And this really encompasses three things that I'm always really intrigued by and love to read about. And especially with the situation in the US that's going on right now. I know I'm not American, but I feel like a book like this just continues to be such an important way to educate yourself. And I'm really just curious to dive into this. Next, we have 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And this has a bookmark in it because I got about that far into it, not last year, but the year before. I think almost exactly over 150 pages into it. It's quite a long novel. And I just started to completely lose track of all the characters in it and just stopped reading it, and it joined my pile of books that just weren't finished. However, I really, really enjoyed the first 100 pages. There's a particular character, and this is not a spoiler, there's a particular character that passes away, and after they passed, I just lost interest in the characters. This spans many generations. It's following a family or a group of people essentially, that move and settle into an empty plot of land and create a town from the ground up. And the village evolves throughout time, spanning many, many generations. And it's got lots of magical realism in it, which I absolutely love in novels. So I'm excited to finish this one this year. I'm not as intimidated by it as I was before, so I think this will definitely be completed. When I decided to move where I was sitting because my foot kept falling asleep, I think it's because I went for a run this morning. I started a running program because I'm trying to run a half marathon this year with my brother, and I don't know what is going on with my right leg, but it is falling asleep like crazy, so I have adjusted and moved spots. So anyway, the next book on my list is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I know a lot of people say this is one of their favorites from Steinbeck, and it just sounds like the perfect summer or fall novel to me. I've never read a Steinbeck, so I would love to get into that American landscape. It's also a family saga, which is one of my favorite things to read. I love a good family saga. I know a lot of people say this book has impacted them quite a bit and is one of their favorites, so it was kind of an automatic buy for me. Then we've got Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. Surprisingly, I've never read any Virginia Woolf. I also have Mrs. Dalloway, a beautiful vintage copy of Mrs. Dalloway as well. I thought this would be a great way to start with Virginia's work, and it's a nice short one. I would love to read more feminist works this year, so especially early feminist works. I know that they're not inclusive and a little outdated, but I still think that there's a lot we can take from works like these into the modern day. It's a nice balance too, compared to some of the other books that I'm reading, which the next two coming up are monstrously large, so I'm happy to have some shorter reads. Next we have A Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. What can I tell you? I'm doing it. And I know this is daunting because of the size, but I know a lot of people have said it's quite approachable and just a great story of a falsely accused man and dealing with years of incarceration. It's dark, it's just holds so much tension within it, and it just sounds right up my alley. I think I'm just gonna have a lot of fun with this. Then we move on to the longest book out of all of them, and that is War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. And I love this edition. I think the cover is really beautiful, and I love the red spine. This was a gift from my mom. It was so funny because when I was in the bookstore and my mom offered to treat me with a book, and I pulled this one off the shelf, and my mom was just stunned at why I would choose this out of all the books in the bookstore. But after a few years of owning this and watching so many people whose opinions I trust read it, I think I'm ready to tackle it this year, and I'm really, really excited. I feel a lot more confident about reading it. I don't think it's going to be one of my first reads of the year. I think with Russian classics, I have a couple in this list. It's from Underground where I can start with. I know that there's a lot of characters in this, and I get really intimidated by a long list of characters. I think there's over 500 characters in this, but I'm really just going to take this really seriously when I read it, and I really want to annotate it and really dive into the historical significance of this book and everything that happened in it. So War and Peace is going to happen this year. Let me know if there are any of these books on this list that you would like me to make a reading vlog of. That's totally a possibility, and I think it would be a fun way to capture the experience. And maybe we can read them together. That's also possible. Let me know. Then we've got Sula by Toni Morrison. I read The Bluest Eye a few years ago and loved it. I love Toni Morrison's writing. She genuinely blows me away. After I read The Bluest Eye, I had to buy as many of these editions of her books as I could find. So I've got Sula, I've got Bluest Eye, Song of Solomon, and Beloved as well. I really love the copy of Jazz as well in these editions, so I'm really, really excited to read this one. I know a lot of people say this is their favorite Toni Morrison. I know we're following a friendship between two girls, I believe, in a small town, and that's all I want to know. I want to go into it blind. I want to just be swept away by her incredible writing and storytelling. Also, whenever she writes from a child's perspective, like in The Bluest Eye, I was just so blown away by how relatable and how nostalgic being a child or reading from a child's perspective would make me feel. And so I'm curious to read that in this as well and just follow the friendship of these two girls and what really turns them to enemies. Is, yeah, more Toni Morrison this year. That's a goal. Then, in the same vein, I read my first James Baldwin. I know, my first one last year. I read Giovanni's Room, which is, I feel like, everyone's gateway into James Baldwin. And I also own Notes of a Native Son. This was a gift from my best friend Jessie many years ago, and I'm finally getting to this year. It is, I believe, his first collection of essays. It was originally published in 1955, and the essays are on life in Harlem, the protest novel, movies, and African Americans abroad. I love when I find an author whose works I really enjoy, and then I read their debut novel or their debut essays or their first ever short story collection. I always feel like it's really telling of their roots and the way that they started into writing and perspectives and themes and things around them that really inspired them at that time. I am so curious to read about this, and I love this cover. As a photographer, it's a stunning cover. So that's my Native Son. Then we've got, I think this is the final Russian classic in this list. We've got The Master and the Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. If I'm pronouncing that wrong, I am so sorry. I have been wanting to read this forever. It's got lots of magical realism, I believe, and one of the most stunning covers I've ever seen, and that alone makes me want to read it. Even the inserts or the little folded parts are so beautiful. I've heard great things about this book, and I've heard it's relatively easy to read compared to some other Russian classics. So I'm very, very excited to get to this one this year. All right, I think we're halfway through, but I think I'm going to try to speed this up a little bit. Next, we've got The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, another very chunky one. I don't know why I'm doing that to myself this year, but you know what? These are the books that I've been anticipating and been intimidated by, so it falls into that category. I also read The Secret History at the beginning of last year. I really, really enjoyed The Secret History, and I just need another Donna Tartt. I just do. Then we've got Shuggie Bain by Douglas Stewart. This I've just been wanting to read for years. I know we're following, during the 1980s, a young boy with his mother who struggles with addiction, I believe. Following the themes of addiction, sexuality, and love. And it's just a beautiful portrayal of working class family and queer childhood. I've heard this one brings people to tears, and I am ready for a good cry and a beautiful novel. Once again, like I've said, I love books that involve family stories and family sagas, so I know I'm going to enjoy this. And it was a Booker Prize winner in 2020, and since it was announced and I read the premise, I've wanted to read it ever since. So 5 years later, I'm finally getting to this book. All right, we've got The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson. Someone, for some reason, donated several of Maggie Nelson's books to my local Goodwill, and so I needed to pick these up. I thought this was a great start to getting into their work. I also have Bluets by them, so that's another one I would like to get into. But this one's really interesting and offers a perspective that I haven't really read from. So it's a quote-unquote genre-bending memoir offering a fierce and timely thinking about desire, identity, and the limitations and possibilities of love and language. It binds an account of Nelson's relationship with her fluidly gendered partner and a journey to and through a pregnancy to a rigorous exploration of sexuality, gender, and family. Never read anything like that. I know a lot of people really enjoy their work, so I'm really curious to get into this memoir. Then we've got Joan Didion's The White Album, book of essays. I've been wanting to read from her for quite some time. I've also have A Year of Magical Thinking and Blue Nights as well from her that I haven't read. It's time. I thought I would start with this book of essays. It's really just a great insight into culture in the 1960s and things that were going on at that time. Then we've got My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. I have the whole quartet, the 4 books in the series. I've tried to read this book 3 times and I just could not get into it. I think I just was not in the right mood to read it. This year is going to be the year. I do not care. I will read this book and probably the quartet as well. Then we've got Stoner by John Williams. This is the only NYRB edition that I have in this list, but I'm really excited to get to this one. This just sounds like the perfect fall read. There's an academia setting. This is just a very beautiful account of this character's life and meditations on his life and his solitude. I don't know too much outside of that for this novel. Then we've got Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I think this is a great gothic fall read, and nothing makes me happier than gothic reads in the fall time. That is something I will never give up as a reader. I always try to include something in the gothic realm, and I know a lot of people love Wuthering Heights. I'm going into it blind, but I know I'm going to love it. I've never read a gothic novel that I haven't loved, so I'm pretty biased there. Next we've got Little Women. I love the film. I just want to read the book. I think this will be a perfect winter read, so probably towards the end of the year. and it's just a heartwarming, beautiful novel that I know I'm going to love, and I'm going to cry because I know what happens based off of the movie, and yeah, I knew I had to read it. Then we've got The Stranger by Albert Camus. I just picked this up at the thrift store, and I know I wanted to get into more philosophy this year, so I thought I would start with this. I know that it's pretty bleak, but I still want to get into it and just expand on my knowledge in philosophy. Then we've got Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Girl, I do not know how to pronounce that. This is one of Poland's most celebrated authors, and I will learn how to pronounce her last name because that is shameful that I did not Google that beforehand. Anyway, I've really been wanting to read this book. I heard it's quite dark and beautiful. There's people turning up dead in a neighborhood, and suspicions mount. It's a thriller in a way, fairy tale elements. It just sounds absolutely maddening and insane. And I've been wanting to read this book for years. I've heard nothing but phenomenal things about this, and it would be my first time reading from a Polish author as well, which is great. I would love to read more books from Eastern European authors. So if you have any recommendations, let me know. Then we've got When We Lost Our Heads by Heather O'Neill. I don't know why I'm still putting off reading this. I saw Heather O'Neill at a Monowad book signing here in Montreal. She hosted the talk between her and Mona about her book Rouge when it had come out, and I really just need to read from a local Montreal author, aka Heather O'Neill. So this takes place in Montreal, which is stunning. I am very, very excited to get into this, and this follows a friendship as well. And I believe it's a historical fiction. It takes place in 19th century Montreal. We've got All About Love by Bell Hooks. I read many years ago The Will to Change by Bell Hooks and absolutely was blown away and just radicalized automatically after reading that book. I was stunned. The writing is beautiful and so eye-opening, and I love reading from authors like this that really expand my knowledge and my understanding of things, and whose theories really, really dive deep into the themes that they're discussing. But All About Love is probably her most commercially known book, and I've never read it, and I own it, so I'm gonna read it. But I don't know if it'll amount to The Will to Change, because I was just so impacted by that book. So we'll have to see how that compares. And we've got The Great Believers by Rebecca Mackay. I've wanted to read this for a long time. I was actually going to read this last year in the spring, and it follows themes that I've wanted to read about for quite some time, and that is the AIDS epidemic. And it follows two different storylines. It follows a character in the 80s whose friend passes away from AIDS and is really impacted by the AIDS epidemic around him and his friend groups and the people he knows. But soon the only person he has left is Fiona, which is Nico's little sister, which is his friend's little sister. And then we follow the perspective from Fiona 30 years later and her life and the way she was impacted also. Right, we've got a few more. We've got Kafka on the Shore by Murakami. Never read a Murakami. Thought this one made a lot of sense for me, and it's got magical realism. Also, I'm scared of Murakami because of the ways he portrays women in his novels, which I'm aware of. So I'm a little terrified, but we'll see how I feel about that. I've been told several times by friends to read that one, so I will. This year is the year. And we've got Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, which I've already been reading. I'm almost 100 pages in. It was a book that I already got into last year and I'm loving it. So it's on this list because I knew I wasn't going to finish it in time. So here we are finishing this up. This will be done the beginning of this year. Then I've got 2 books that are on my e-reader. I've got The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, which I've wanted to read about and learn more about in general. I read a couple of books last year that were fiction books on Palestine, and they really impacted me last year, and I just want to learn more from a historical nonfiction account of what happened to the people in Palestine. And this is, from my research, a great one to start with. And then the last book on my list was Seven Moons of Mali Almeida, which I wanted to read for quite some time. I really want to explore the themes that this book includes. I've read a couple of pages of it just to sample it, and it sounds very interesting. I love books that surround death and grief. I think these are themes that I want to explore more in my own work as well, so it's definitely something that I would like to read from. And I know that there's magical realism in this book as well, so I'm really excited to have more magical realism this year. And those are the 30 books that I'm going to read from this year, and I'm so excited. I'm going to set up the shelf with my TBR all lined up, which I'm really excited for. And if you guys have read any of these, please let me know. I'm so curious to hear your thoughts. If any of these are your favorites, or if you absolutely hated them, also let me know. I want to know the tea. And if there are any of these books you'd like me to make reading vlogs on, I will prioritize those during the year. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys soon.